And now it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce our 10 filmmakers who will be on the panel this year. To begin with, on behalf of National Geographic Documentary Films' Sugarcane, a deeply personal excavation of the long-buried history of wrongdoing at an Indian residential school in Canada, please welcome the co-director with Emily Cassie, Julian Brave NoiseCat. On behalf of Greenwich Films' Carville, Winning is Everything Stupid, a profile of the legendary Democratic political strategist who led the effort to convince President Biden to not seek re-election, please welcome the director, Matt Tyrnauer. On behalf of Picture House's Porcelain War, a portrait of married artists in present-day Ukraine whose lives are upended by the Russian invasion, please welcome the co-director with Slava Leontyev, Brendan Bellomo. On behalf of Level Grounds Union, a chronicle of the David versus Goliath effort of labor organizers and employees at an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island to form a union, please welcome the co-director with Brett's story, Stephen Maing. On behalf of Netflix's Daughters, a film about a program that helps incarcerated men to reconnect with their daughters and for fathers and daughters who are specifically impacted by it, please welcome the co-director with Natalie Ray, Angela Patton. On behalf of Fourth Act Films' Hollywoodgate, which documents the Taliban as they occupy a former CIA base in Kabul in the year after America's withdrawal from Afghanistan, please welcome the director, Ibrahim Nash'at. On behalf of Warner Brothers' Superman, the Christopher Reeve Story, in which the life, work, and tragic accident of a beloved movie star are examined by family and friends 20 years after his death. Please welcome the co-director with Ian Bonhot, Peter Ettedgui. On behalf of Netflix's Will and Harper, which follows the comedic actor Will Ferrell and Harper Steele, an old friend from Saturday Night Live who recently came out as trans, on a road trip across America, please welcome the director Josh Greenbaum. On behalf of MTV Documentary Films' Black Box Diaries, in which a filmmaker investigates her own sexual assault by a powerful man in Japan, aiming to bring the perpetrator to justice and to create social change, please welcome the director, Shiori Ito. And on behalf of Focus Features' Piece by Piece, a chronicle of the roller coaster life and career of musician Pharrell Williams as told through Lego animation, please welcome an Oscar winner for 2013's 20 Feet from Stardom, Morgan Neville. Thank you all for being here. Take this in, guys, because I don't know how often you get together this many terrific filmmakers and 5 co-directors as well, who we're so happy to be joined by. I would like to begin our conversation just going down the line to talk about the origin stories of these films one by one. Julian, this is Sugarcane, your feature directorial debut. Can you explain how you and your co-director, Emily, wound up working together and how it quickly became very personal for you and your family?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Scott. It's such an honor to be up here with so many amazing films and more importantly, I think, amazing filmmakers and people. We obviously had the opportunity to share brunch earlier today, and I was sitting next to Angela Patton, who should win a MacArthur, I think, like immediately for her work. And Peter, who was so kind and also shared that his son went and watched our film, which was just meant the world. And Shiori, who his film is incredibly brave, and I'm excited to see finally in person next week or 2 weeks from now in New York. And I just want to also begin by acknowledging my co-director, Emily Cassie, who's in the audience today. And yeah. Because without her, I would never have made this film. I'm not a filmmaker, it's not my background. I'm a writer and an activist, I guess. And, I don't think I could have set out to make this film on my own. Our film follows an investigation into abuse and missing children at the Indian residential school that my family was sent to near Williams Lake, British Columbia, Canada. And about 3 years ago now, a discovery of unmarked graves, potential unmarked graves, happened at an Indian residential school in Canada, and it made international headlines. You may have heard about it. And the day after that happened, M, who I worked my very first reporting job with in New York City at the Huffington Post, gave me a call and asked me if I'd be open to collaborating with her on a documentary. And I knew that my family had a very intense connection to the residential schools. I didn't know exactly what that story was, but I knew that it was a heavy story. And so I needed to take some time to think about it. And I did. I actually took 2 entire weeks before I got back to M. I'm really sorry, M. And in the meantime, M forged ahead. She's been making documentaries since she was like 14 years old. That's not even an exaggeration. And she's also an incredible investigative journalist. She's tenacious, like the best journalists are. And she went off and found a First Nation that was about to begin a search at the school nearest to them. And she sent the chief of that First Nation a cold email. His name's Willie Sellers. And she said, hey, I'd love to document this search. And the next day, the chief got back to her and he said, the creators always had great timing. Just yesterday, our council had a conversation and we agreed that it was essential that this search is documented. And so M packed her bags, got tickets to the place that the First Nation is from, which is called Williams Lake. And she was about ready to go when I gave her a call back finally. And I said, hey, I really slept on and thought about that documentary that you mentioned. I think I'd be ready to take it on with you. And that's when M told me that she'd identified this First Nation that was leading a search, and that search was happening near St. Joseph's Mission, near Williams Lake, British Columbia. And when she said that, I was completely floored, because that was the school that my family was sent to, and where, to the best of my knowledge at the time, my father was born. So out of 139, I just want to get the math of this right for everybody. Out of 139 federally funded Indian residential schools across Canada, M, who happened to be Canadian, by the way, she's from Toronto, who I happened to sit next to at my first and only real, honestly, full-time reporting gig in New York City, happened to choose to focus her documentary in what became our first feature documentary on the one school that my family was taken away to and where my father's life began. And, I didn't know what to make of that at the time. But I think now that we've made the film and we're out here sharing it with the world, I think I had to come to terms with it. And I do have a sense that there was something else leading us to this story. And I'm incredibly grateful to M for being a catalyst and a leader for that.
Thank you. Matt, you are a veteran journalist and documentary filmmaker. Your docs that people may know and should certainly seek out if they don't are Valentino, The Last Emperor, Studio 54, Where's My Roy Cohn, many others. But being a longtime part of the documentary community, you certainly knew that one of the all-time great documentaries is a 1993 film called The War Room, which chronicles how James Carville and others helped to get Bill Clinton elected president in 1992. What led you down the path of pursuing another film about James 30 plus years later? And what was your initial view of what this might focus on? I know it evolved.
Yeah. Well, Carville exploded into prominence in '92 in that election. Curiously, before that, he was 48 when Bill Clinton won the presidency. Before that, he had been a terrific failure for the first part of his career, which I thought was a very interesting thing about him. There's something today that I call Zuckerberg syndrome, which is where you expect to be a billionaire when you're a half a foot out of Harvard or Stanford. And I thought it was interesting to tell a story about someone who was a late bloomer, to say the least. I think this film could serve as a good bookend to the War Room. It's the end of a storied career, someone who's enjoyed more than 30 years of being a household name. But I think James even himself says that after a certain point he became famous for being famous. He's an incredibly substantive person. I think he's, as his former partner in political consulting, Paul Begala, says, the smartest son of a bitch who ever did that for a living. And I think we could learn a lot from seeing how a master functions at work, which is what I was doing for about a year into shooting. Then in May of 2023, I was shooting with him one morning in New Orleans when the ABC News Washington Post poll of that month came out, and it showed former President Trump with a considerable lead over Joe Biden in a matchup poll. And in the internals, Carville that day clearly saw something really terrifying for Biden's electoral prospects, and he began sounding an alarm which fell on deaf ears for months and months and months. Really, he was the only one out on a limb saying what became increasingly obvious to a lot of people was that there was an age issue that was going to haunt the president until Election Day and lead to an almost certain defeat. Well, I was making a film about someone tilting with windmills for the better part of a year, and I locked that film on the day of the Trump-Biden debate. So I had a finished film that was headed to Telluride that day, and I actually screened that cut for a kind of test audience, counter-programming it against the debate. And we started the film right when the debate started, and 10 minutes into the test screening, my phone lit up, and it was James Carville texting me. The text said, "I just took 2 gummies and I'm listening to country music." So without having to tune in to the debate, I turned to the editor who was sitting next to me. I said, "We're recutting the film," which we did, and it did premiere at Telluride a little less than a month later, and it's out now. I felt it had to get out before the election, and Carville, he's not the most modest person I've ever met. In fact, he just landed in Savannah, and he'll be at the screening tomorrow with me, but he didn't do a victory lap, but the film is a lightning in the bottle film where you see someone who sees around corners and is famous for that, doing that very almost impossible thing. And he is now an evangelist for the Harris campaign, trying to help save this country from, I think, a really bad fate. Thank you.
Brendan, you have been a filmmaker for years. You won a Student Academy Award back in 2009. You've done all kinds of different capacities on other projects, including the VFX for a great film called Beasts of the Southern Wild. But you had never made a documentary before this film, and in fact, this film was sort of a happy accident. You did not set out to tell the film that you and Slava eventually told. Can you explain what happened?
Absolutely. At first, I would love to acknowledge my co-director and participant in Porcelain War, Slava Leontiev, who is here in the audience from Ukraine. Slava and I connected many years before the war. One of our producers grew up under Russian oppression in communist Poland, and she and her family became political refugees when they escaped to the United States. And despite the distance from their culture, they worked really hard to maintain a connection to that through music and through art and through cinema. And about 8 years ago, she discovered Anya and Slava's porcelain figurines. They are a husband and wife duo from Ukraine who make these incredible, incredible sculptures of animals that they decorate with the stories of their lives. And our producer was so moved by these because they reminded her of home. And she showed them to me, and I had never seen anything like them before in my entire life. I thought, how could something so small contain such big stories? And so the 4 of us began work on an animation project together. And then Russia invaded. And I called up Slava. I said, "Are you okay? When are you leaving?" And he said, "We're not leaving. We're going to stay, and we're going to keep making our art at night." And I asked him, why are you doing this at night? What are you doing during the day? And he told me for the very first time, I'm in the Ukrainian Special Forces and I'm teaching civilians how to fight. And these are peace-loving, everyday people that are in his unit. They're doctors, they're IT professionals, they're artists, they're farmers. And in this moment, we all realized there were two forms of resistance going on. This is the largest conflict in Europe since World War II. This is a genocidal war in that authoritarian governments such as Russia seek to destroy the very identity, the very culture of places like Ukraine. When they first invaded, they destroyed universities, they destroyed museums, and they killed artists. And these were artists that were continuing to preserve their culture by creating new work, and doing this in a time where they were also defending their families and their home. And so we wanted to empower them to tell this story through their eyes and in their voice. And yet this seemed almost impossible because at the time we were separated by 6,000 miles between us. We were working in Los Angeles, they were in Kharkiv, about 19 miles from the front line. And we had two cultures that separated us. We didn't speak the same language, and yet we needed to figure out a way to help them tell their story. And at the beginning of the war, I asked Anya, how are you feeling? And she said, we're so alone here, we feel as if we're on the moon. And this stuck with me. It set off a spark because it reminded me of the Apollo mission when these astronauts were stranded on their spacecraft and it was failing. And back in Houston, they had a duplicate of every single piece of equipment that they had on that spacecraft. And so for every lens and every camera and every microphone that we sent into Kharkiv, I had the same thing in my hands in Los Angeles. And we were able, through the common language of art, through sharing photographs and drawings, to empower Slava and our cinematographer Andrei, who is an oil painter, who's never used a camera before, to tell their story, something about the power of humanity, even in the darkest times, to be able to put good back in the world, even when it seems like all hope is lost, and to share their story with the world and what they risk their lives to do. That is the content of Porcelain War.
Thank you. Stephen, I wonder if you can talk about how you came to even be aware of, let alone eventually embedded with this particular unionization effort that you chronicle in your film. And I should note that this was a long-term commitment that you and your colleagues were with these guys and gals. And I mean, in the middle of COVID, schlepping to Staten Island, not sure that what this would ever lead to. How did it get started for you?
Sure. I also want to start off and just say thank you so much for having us all here. This is such an incredible group of filmmakers, and I feel like even in this short amount of time on this trip, it's kind of wonderful to get to talk to incredible filmmakers who are making and taking great emotional and actual real-world risks. My friend Ibrahim, for example, Shiori, your team, Porcelain War and Slava, and Julian, you know, I am so moved by the work you all are doing and honored to be here, and I'm so glad that we can have this kind of conversation. So thank you. Thank you for supporting all of these films by coming here. So at the height of the pandemic, there was a worker named Chris Smalls who had put in about 5 years as an assistant manager. He had been moving up the ranks thinking that one day he would become management. When people started getting sick, started dying in his Amazon warehouse, he tried to speak up for his workers. And they were packing up PPE for the rest of the world, but not being given any kind of health or safety precautions. So he led a walkout, and he and a cohort of friends and coworkers left the building one day and never looked back because they had decided this was enough. And so the incredible act of defiance that he demonstrated was that this was a moment that he said, you know what, like, we need to go around the country and start trolling Jeff Bezos's many mansions. And so they would bring a giant Bezos puppet, a guillotine, things like that. It was all very cute. During that year, our incredible producers Samantha Curley and Mars Verone had independently reached out to Chris just out of curiosity to see if anybody was documenting any of this. And he put them together, and they started scheming up an idea of how might a film be made about Chris and this unfolding movement. They reached out to Brett's Story. Brett reached out to myself and our cinematographer, Martin Tachico, and a team was assembled. And flash forward to a year, there was an incredible moment where Chris decided that it was not just going to be about trolling Bezos, but that they were going to do the thing that he had avoided for 29 years, which is start a unionization campaign. And so we were in the fortuitous position to film from day one this unfolding effort. And I think I'll just, finish by saying the incredible thing about this group was that it held many different kinds of people. It was multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-class, and they were up against a $14.2 million anti-unionization campaign. So basically they were union busters roaming all over the warehouses, and they were able to beat that Amazon effort with a $125,000 GoFundMe.
Wow.
So, it was an incredible act of people power, of collective organizing, and I guess the last thing I'll add is, it reminded me of something that I had spent about 7 years prior working on, which was a film called Crime and Punishment that followed a group of whistleblower cops in the NYPD, active duty minority cops, who set out to prove that the department was acting in a racist, structurally racist manner. And it was incredible just because the complaints that the cops that I spent time with in this historic class action lawsuit were the exact same complaints that the Amazon workers were experiencing. Productivity quotas, a culture of fear, and retaliation on the job when they would speak up for their coworkers and for the people around them. And so that was a really chilling realization and was a little bit of the engine and fire for me to stay with this story.
Thank you. Yeah. Angela, Daughters is your first outing as a filmmaker, but this is a subject matter that has been a big part of your life for years and years. And in fact, I wonder if you can just set the scene in terms of what you were doing that led to you giving a TED Talk that led to you and your co-director, Natalie, ultimately teaming up on this.
Greetings, everyone. I'd like to say I love this energy. It is live. Thank you. Clap for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And again, to all of the directors on the stage with me, awesome. I am blessed to be with all of this talent, and I am absorbing it. But a very talented woman, saw my TED Talk. She's here. So y'all gonna give it up one more time for Natalie Ray. That's right. And so what was I doing to get a TED Talk? I was working, doing my work. I was definitely following the mission of Girls for a Change. I'm the founder of the organization, and it's based in Richmond, Virginia. And I had an opportunity to give a TED Talk about this rare dance that took place in a city jail that was actually facilitated, and this idea came from girls in my community with an unstoppable imagination. And these girls decided that they wanted to have this dance in a jail for fathers that could not participate in the community one because one of their friends' fathers was incarcerated. And instead of them sitting back, waiting for someone else to think about how they should show up, they decided to write a letter to the sheriff, and they understood, really more than me, middle school girls, that they work for us. And they said, I believe that this sheriff, who has all of these ideas about family unification, working in the community, should give us what we want, because he works for us. They did their research in a social change activist program that I was running, and they decided to ask for something that they felt would change their world. And fortunately, this sheriff said yes. And the girls were able to do this dance in a jail in Richmond, Virginia. all on their own terms. And so someone found out about this because they met me in Mexico. And she said, I want you to tell me something that would help me sell your organization. It was a workshop. And I said, girls are dating their daddies and the mayor approves. And they said, I want to know more. And I was invited to do a TED Talk with TED women. I get off the stage, y'all, and 20 people lined up to ask me to make a film. Then I get home, and over 30 have emailed me to make a film. But they all wanted to do a film about a jail story. But this one amazing woman emailed me, and I didn't take 2 weeks to get back to her. I responded within 5 minutes because she said, I want to make a film with you about the girls. Absolutely. And she understood, just like I did, that we needed to center the girls in this story, because we understood immediately it would not be a jail story. We were going to hit you with a love story. One about these girls again, and how they understood forgiveness, how they understood that they could embrace their anger, their despair, but also leave you with hopefulness. And so Natalie and I were able to collaborate on something very special. And she gave me an opportunity to have a debut film that went through a lot of ups and downs and challenges and uphill battles. But what we did collaboratively was we understood our mission. We understood that we were doing something that would be solution-driven. And we both understood our strengths, right? And our talents that we can bring together. And I realized that when she asked me and was going to send to the girls, I was a storyteller anyway. And now I have an opportunity to put it on a screen and show more people about the power and the brilliance of Black girls. And this gave me an opportunity to make sure that any story that you have heard or you have seen about Black girls that have adultified them, that have stereotyped them, it's the wrong story. Yes. So that's our story.
Thank you, thank you. Ibrahim, you are from Egypt. You live in Germany. You had never directed a feature film before Hollywoodgate. How do you wind up in Afghanistan in the first place, and then, to even crazier, gaining the trust of the Taliban to the extent that they let you observe them for a year? I mean, so many of those steps along the way, most people would have been out of there, but you stuck it out. How did this even get started?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. And I have to repeat the thanks for everybody, because it's really brilliant being here among all of these directors. But I also want to thank all of our producers that are not here, that were behind all of us sitting here. We wouldn't have done it without them. And the rest of the team that really took a huge part in whatever we shoot. They help us make it into a brilliant film that you get to see. I'm not calling my film a brilliant one, but I mean it makes
I will. Okay, yeah.
It makes the film of high quality. So if you please clap for all of the producers of this film. And since you've got a lot of energy, I want to play a little game with you guys. So you get the chance to clap or boo. So the story that I'm gonna tell has a lot of boos. Like boo, like this. So when the US left Afghanistan after 20 years of war, and this war was meant, maybe you guys, some of you were not even born when the US decided to invade Afghanistan, was meant to bring peace to Afghanistan, end terrorism, and make the country a democratic country. But 20 years down the road, the US is leaving Afghanistan, leaving behind everybody that supported them, stood by their side, believed in them, and decided to leave it in the hands of the Taliban. I was in Berlin at that time watching the news like everybody was watching, and there was these scenes of everybody running to the airport trying to leave the country. I was watching this with my heart beating, and I was sitting in the editing another movie of our producer Talal Derki, and I couldn't continue working, and we were started to talk about what to do, and we said it's very hard to get an access to Taliban, and it's like, okay, ting ting ting. It rang in my head. I worked in journalism for over 10 years, which I actually didn't tell him because I didn't want him to consider me as a journalist. I wanted him to consider me as a filmmaker. So like, okay, I think I could get an access to the Taliban. So I told him about my journalistic career. I filmed with a lot of world leaders like you did. I was like, yeah, see the pictures, I filmed with that. And I think I could find my ways of getting the access to the Taliban. And as a journalist, your access, you get way faster than a filmmaker because you use the journalistic approach. So quickly, I was in Afghanistan through a fixer who bailed on me once I arrived in the country. He deserves a boo. And I found myself there with a translator that is a Talibani that he sat me with. So I went to the Taliban that has given me the permission to film with them, and they just kicked us out of the office. And money was running out, time is passing. It's scary, guys, being there. At that time when everybody was leaving and I'm sitting there, not having something to do, holding my camera, trying to meet those Talibans, and it was not working. So I told my guy, hey, listen, I think it's not working, I'm gonna leave. And luckily the Talibani told me, why would you wanna leave without actually filming anything? How about you film with some younger Talibans? So he took me into this. He said, come with me to the airport, I introduce you to some people. And he was taking me to the airport, and I quickly realized this is not the normal airport, it's the military airport. And once we entered a door, and they closed the door, and at that door it's written this word, Hollywoodgate. I'm like, what the hell? So I'm asking, what is that? They said, oh, this is the previous CIA base. We just took over it now, and we're gonna check what the American left behind. So I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. I wanna make this movie. So everything in my head, and this is something that is really incredible about documentaries, you always set up to do something, it takes you somewhere else. And you've got to be flexible and follow the leads. So everything around me, I was like, I'm gonna stay in this place. And that's how I met the first character in the movie, who's a young lieutenant that wants to be a big leader of the Taliban. And the other one, and after meeting him and he agreed to film with me, he said, but you cannot film in this space. You have to have the permission of the leader. I was like, okay, I get the permission of the leader. And then the leader says, oh, but you have to have the permission of my leader. Like, okay, I get the permission of the leader. It's like, my cousin has been appointed as a leader now, so you need to get his permission. And it keeps going up the ladder until I met the big guy, who is arriving fresh to Kabul, never seen a journalist in his life, and I'm going to him. His name is Maulay Mansour, and that was before he got appointed as the head of the air forces of the Taliban. So I met him, and I said, I would like to film with Mukhtar. He's like, yeah, you can film with him. Very relaxed. I was like, can I film with you too? It's like, yeah, you can film with me. But that's the beginning. How it went through, it went hard, but there was a lot of resistance from our side. Because I was perceived by the Afghans as a Taliban. When I walk in the street among the Taliban, filming the Taliban, the Afghans considered me as a Taliban. And that put a lot of pain in my heart because I'm there for the Afghans, I'm there for the people that I somehow consider myself part of. And I didn't want to leave the country betraying them as well. Like I claimed to go against the idea of someone betraying them, and I would just leave because it's too hard to do it. So I kept going all the way through. Whenever they tell me don't come back here, figure out a way to convince someone to come back. And I kept going all the way through until the lovely Secret Service of Taliban, the unlovely, came to me on the last day of the shoot, and they said, you've got to come to our office tomorrow with all of your footage. And I was like, no, thank you. And I left in the same day.
Well, thank you. Peter, as hard as it is to believe, it has been 2 decades since Christopher Reeve died, which even though he'd been in a difficult situation for a few years already. It was still a shock for many of us who kind of grew up with him. In the years since then, I know that his three children have said that, like him, they want to be very forward-looking, we're not particularly interested in doing anything to stop and look back, and had passed like a lot of the opportunities that were spoken about where people wanted to work with you, it just wasn't right, and they were not agreeable to doing it. So how, when you and your co-director showed up, what basically created a scenario where they are now your guys' biggest fans? They're thrilled with how this turned out, but what even convinced them to give it a go?
We worked really hard on that game of persuasion. It was something we were desperate to do, just to back up a little bit. Actually, I mean, you've done the audience participation. Just everyone has said how wonderful it is to be here and to thank the audience. And I just want to also just add, at the risk of being repetitious, but it's tough for us down this end of the line.
I know, it's been a
I just want to say, it is a tremendous honor to be amongst these filmmakers and with you, Scott, and with all of you. We had such a wonderful screening of our film earlier today, and it was very moving to be amongst all the students from SCAD. And anyway, so going back to our story, we had our previous film was called Rising Phoenix, and it was about the Paralympic movement. And one day, Ian, my fellow director, and Otto, our wonderful editor, Otto Burnham, we were sitting in the edit, spooling very fast through miles of footage of various Paralympic moments. And we came up to one which stopped us short, and it was from the Atlanta 1996 Paralympic Games, that Christopher Reeve was effectively the MC of the opening ceremony. And he was in a wheelchair. We figured out, it must have been like a year or so since his accident. And there he was, apparently shorn of all his superpowers, of everything that he embodied in my mind as a child growing up, adoring the Superman, the early Superman films. And yet there was something much more special, which was a kind of a human superpower at work, as he spoke to an audience of, 70, 80,000 people, extolling the virtues and accomplishments of the Paralympian athletes who were filling the stadium. And, on a ventilator, so he could only actually speak on the out-breath. But with this beautiful face and with this sort of playful quality in his eyes that I always associated with his Superman. And it was just a moment of joy that came and went in the edit. And we couldn't use that footage in the film because of the way that we were unfolding that particular story, but it stuck with us. And meanwhile, cut to after the pandemic, an archive producer who we know well now, Daniel Kilroy, had out of the blue, he got in touch with Matthew Reeve, and he'd said, do you happen to have any archive that might serve as the basis for a film about your father? And I can only imagine that Matthew must have thought, yeah, boy, do we have archive. And it coincided, as you say, Scott, I mean, the kids had been approached many times to make a biographical film about their father, both in documentary and in fiction, a dramatized version of his life. And they'd always sort of had avoided it because they just didn't feel it was the right time. They weren't ready. They hadn't found their own paths in life properly. So they sort of really had avoided it. But this particular moment coincided with the upcoming 20th anniversary that you alluded to. And it also kind of coincided with the moment that they just very recently sold their parents' home in New York State. And while going through the sale, they had obviously sort of come across these boxes and boxes of archives in the basement, paper archives, old movies, home movies. And they kind of felt it was the right time, and this archive was there. And so they asked Dan, well, we're interested, but who would it be? It was kind of like fate somehow that from Rising Phoenix to meeting the three Reeves for the first time, it felt like it was something that was meant to happen. Now, the process of actually persuading them just happened. It happened quite quickly because they'd seen both McQueen and Rising Phoenix, so they kind of felt comfortable about us doing it. That's mad, but anyway. We pulled the wool over their eyes on that one, we had several meetings with them, and it's very important for me to say that they had no creative control over the film, and they didn't want any creative control over the film, but they did want to know that their father's story was in good hands. And we pretty quickly established some ground rules that nothing was going to be off the table, that we weren't going to do a celebrity puff piece. We wanted to make a film that that showed his flaws as well as his many virtues. Because, for Ian and me, I think we felt that it's only by showing the flaws that you really capture the true heroism of what he accomplished in his activism and advocacy. So, once we'd had, I think we met individually over Zoom several times, but then we got them all together for 3 or 4 hours in New York. It was slightly intimidating because they are all tall, godlike people. And Ian and I are sort of short Europeans. But it went so well, and I think we kind of came out and we felt about that meeting that actually we weren't just telling a story about their dad, which is previously what we had aspired to. We were telling a story about a family, and telling a story about a father through the eyes of his children. And they didn't realize that they were going to be the stars of the film at that point. But yeah, that's how it came together.
Thank you. Josh, you go back a long way with both Will and Harper, and I will leave it to you to talk more about their history together. But I guess the idea that that you and 14 collaborators would be on the road with them for 16 days on this kind of trip of exploration. How did you wind up as the guy they trusted to kind of captain that? And what did you think you were signing up for at the beginning? Obviously, like so many of these projects, they take on a life of their own. But just why you, and what was it originally at the beginning?
Thank you, Scott, for having me. And I think I asked myself a few times on the trip, why me, while I was sleeping in a comfort inn for the 7th time and wondering if I had bed bugs. It started, let's see, there was a 2-part to that question, but it started, obviously, for those who don't know the story, it starts, as many stories up here start with one brave act. I was thinking about it as I was thinking about every story, sometimes the brave act of our subjects, sometimes the brave act of our directors and filmmakers who are up here. And the story here started with, I think, when Harper Steele decided to come out and transition, and she sent a letter to her good friend, her best friend of 30 years, Will Ferrell, coming out. And that started the story. Prior to me, Will, knew that Harper loved to do these cross-country road trips. She's done hundreds of them prior to her transition, and Will asked her, do you think you can do one? Have you done one yet? And she was lamenting the fact that, no, I don't know, I haven't, and I don't know if I could. And so Will had this idea, what if I fly to New York where she lived, and I'll accompany you. I'll be by your side for your first road trip since you transition. And along the way, we can figure out what this transition means to us and to our friendship and our relationship. So that's really where the story of the trip came about. Being filmmakers and storytellers themselves, they thought maybe this would be worthy of a documentary. And so, as Scott, you were mentioning, I have a relationship with both of them. I've made 4 feature docs before, but I actually know Will and Harper through my narrative feature work because Will produced my first narrative feature called Barb and Stargood of Vista Del Mar, which is a very fun Kristen Wiig comedy. So when you'll see Kristen Wiig has a little moment in our documentary as well. And I knew Harper Steele because through Kristen Wiig, Harper came in and did what we call a punch-up pass on the screenplay. So I knew them both, which made it for a very unique start for me because in all of my previous documentaries, I've not only not known my subjects prior, but usually it's me approaching them and asking them. So this was an inverse relationship, and I think they were asking me, do you think there's a film here and a story here? And if the obvious answer was, yeah, absolutely. I think and to answer your second question, my anticipation of what the story was on one hand was, this question that Harper's asking, which is, I love this country so much, but will it love me back? And I think that's one of the primary questions I knew we were going to explore in the film. But the deeper question, I think, was one around their friendship, their relationship, Harper finding her identity, much deeper themes at play. There's a moment in the middle of the film where after we've sort of gone to a lot of different places across the country, she starts to have this revelation that she says, I don't think I'm afraid of everyone hating me. I think I'm afraid of hating myself. And it gutted me, it gutted Will, and it was this, and so all of a sudden the journey of the story of the film became really a question of self-acceptance and self-love, which I think is, something obviously that is universal that we all can relate to. And meanwhile, I think Will was on his own journey as well of figuring out what does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be an ally? And all along the way, there are a lot of jokes. I should say that because they are two very, very funny professional comedians. And so I came back after 16 days on the road with 250 hours of footage and tried to figure out how to put that into a presentable film. So I would love to shout out, I think we would all love to shout out our editors. I know some people give shout out to the editors. Monique Zawitowski, so thank you.
Thank you. Shiori, this is also your feature directorial debut. Back in 2015, you were a journalist and experienced this terrible event. You knew that Japanese society was not particularly kind to people who came out about surviving a rape or sexual assault. Not that America's been terrific about that either, but you were warned that it could ruin your career if you pursued this, right? And yet you started recording these video diaries on your phone and recording interactions with the authorities covertly. At that time, what did you imagine you would end up doing with these things? Was it for, well, let me leave it there. What did you imagine this would become?
Thank you. Clearly, this wasn't what I imagined. Today, speaking, before I start speaking, I just want to give a breathing session. I need that because I've been hearing amazing story and I just want to breathe in. And so if we can all breathe in. It's so good to be here. It's first of all, as a journalist, I had to cross the line to make a film about talking about myself. But when I was raped, I've been, of course, seek help for police, investigator, prosecutor. But then it turned out they had possible power involved, so they tried to cover it under the carpet. And that's why I started recording our conversation, because I didn't believe what was going on, and I just start feeling skeptical. So, but in a way, seeing what happened to me as a journalist covering this case, question about the case as a journalist was much easier for me. I could have distance from what happened to me, so that helped me. But once the case didn't go anywhere, 2 years later, in early 2017, I decided to go public, to ask other journalists to cover the case. And then nothing happened. And I realized, okay, then I will do something in the film. But it took 8 years to make this film. I had 400 hours of footage. So yeah, thank you, amazing editor. Without, our editors, we couldn't make this film. But another part that made this impossible project possible is that I had amazing now producer who is here today, Hannah Akbeling. I just want to give her. So she just contacted me out of nowhere after I went public. She just called me. It wasn't Zoom, it was Skype in 2017, said, I have a Japanese friend and I heard about your situation. You just had to escape Japan now. And just, I didn't know her, so I was like, she's from Sweden, living in London, journalist. I was like, what is this blonde woman want from me? She was inviting me to her house and staying, but in the end, I took the opportunity because I couldn't work in Japan. I started getting all the threats and all the online trolls, so it was extremely hard to work for me to cover this story from Japan. So I end up living under IKEA desk of her office, Hannah's office, for a couple of years, and she just decided to come back to Japan with me, saying, no one can harm Swedish human rights. So she literally became, human shield. And since then, our filmmaking started. And Hannah, as a journalist, amazing, human being, but she didn't really know how to film. So we have really real footage. We call it Hannah effect, very real. But without that, all the footage, without her love and courage to ask this question, coming back to Japan with me, we didn't have a film. And she always believed in this telling story. And so, I couldn't imagine making this film to today, but because we could, along the way, not only Hannah, we had amazing collaborator, editor, so we made everything possible. But now, because it's not, it's still hard to talk about sexual violence, but because it was possible power related, we don't have any distributor or any screening date back in Japan yet. So for me, just speaking here today makes a big deal because this can reach back to Japan and say, hey, we're speaking about it here in Savannah, so, maybe now. Woo! So, thank you so much. And our film is tomorrow, 4 p.m. So if you can come and see and just spread the good word, maybe in Japanese so Japanese people can see it. Google Translate. It will be helpful. Thank you.
And also, it's not every day you get to go and see one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, which Shiori has been named. So that's pretty cool. Morgan, you have been making great documentaries of a wide variety of subjects for years. There's everything from Mr. Rogers to so many topics, but music, I think, is your first love, I believe. And we've got Troubadours, a great early doc. There's, as I mentioned, 20 Feet from Stardom, and the list goes on. So knowing that music's of interest to you, that's still, I still am curious how you and Pharrell Williams found each other here and what your reaction was when he says to you, I'd love to work together, but I will need it to be animated with Legos.
Okay. First of all, I'm not going to thank you for making me follow all of these profound, heartfelt answers, because I made a cartoon. I've been making docs for a long time, and I remember the before times when docs were the spinach of filmmaking. And it's so great to see the richness and diversity of the storytelling of these films and these filmmakers. So I'm so happy we're in this time right now. About 5.5 years ago, I just finished the Mr. Rogers film and a film I'd done about Orson Welles, and I think I was kind of wanting to try something different. I've made a lot of films about creativity in my career, and I felt like I needed to go somewhere new. And I got this call saying Pharrell wants to meet you. And he gave me this pitch. He said, I love your films, and I had this idea that we could make a film in Lego. And at that moment, I was not looking to make a music film again. In fact, I specifically did not want to make a music film. But when he said Lego, I thought, hell yeah. Like, I didn't know what that was gonna mean, but it seemed like such a crazy idea that I wanted to figure out what that was. And I don't, it's many different things. The film, it is a musical, and it's a biopic, and it's an animated feature, and it's part documentary, but it was figuring out a new way of telling stories, and that it wasn't just about creativity, it was itself an act of creativity. And that was something that was really important to me, to figure out new ways of moving nonfiction storytelling ahead in a way. And it was the most unusual experience I've had making a film. We essentially made the film twice. We made the film once as a kind of a Frankenstein documentary that had, interviews and footage I'd shot and archive footage. I hired a kid out of art school to draw in the edit bay with us, and I was sticking those in the edit, and I had movie clips just to build the whole film. And then we took it into animation and kind of reinvented it again. And for me, it was just, I've never learned more making a film than for more in the process of making a film that I have on this film. And without a doubt, whatever that itch was I wanted to scratch, this film nailed it. So I'm happy for the experience.
That's great. And it's if you have not yet seen it, it's so cool. Not only are we seeing animated Lego animated Jay-Z and on, but we get to see Lego animated Morgan Neville too, which is a treat. Now that you've seen him up here in the flesh, so I'm glad that we set the table in this way where we went one by one. But I want to encourage for the rest of the way anyone to jump in when you have something to say, because I'm gonna direct some at individuals, but they're topics that I think apply to groups. Now, first of all, we have never had, when we've had a panel of 10 like this, fully half of the group co-directed a film. And I want to ask, because I think we have some filmmakers in the audience and watching the video of this, just how that actually works. Is it a matter of you do this stuff, I'll do this stuff, or we're all going to do everything together, or somewhere in between? So we're talking again, just to remind people, Peter, Angela, Brendan, Stephen, and Julian. Any one of you wants to jump first, but just how that works, briefly.
Well, I'll start.
Yes.
I can't wait to hear everybody's stories. Originally, I was actually going to go to Ukraine with the crew, but we had sent one camera in advance through the help of an incredible volunteer, actually a hairdresser in New Jersey, who brought this camera in with 50 bags of medical equipment. And it arrived to Slava and Andrei, and they began to do some filming. I had no idea if they would even have, the spirit to capture anything with, their power was going out, the bombs were going off outside of their house, and they did. And they filmed the most beautiful footage, the most personal footage, it was very intimate and very incredible. And they felt there's something that the news wasn't showing. This was a story that they wanted to tell about this side of the war that you were never seeing, about humanity, about hope. And it was not focused on destruction, but the resistance to that destruction. And so it was like, okay, they're doing this in their voice. They're doing this through their eyes. And so our collaboration became, this very, very unique switch happened. When we saw this footage, it was like, okay, there's no way we're gonna go. If you're observing, a conversation with the whole film crew, it changes the essence of that. But when you have artists who are already master visual storytellers and they're just picking up a new brush, so to speak, with the camera, then that becomes their story. And so everything through our co-direction was about empowering Slava and our DP, Andrei, to be able to translate their artistic instincts into the new medium of cinema. And they were so incredible at doing that. And so I used to teach at NYU, at Tisch, at the film school there. And so we created, in essence, kind of an impromptu film school, a set of kind of not classes, but conversations as creative people that already had the impetus to to work together, and we shared such a unspoken understanding of what they wanted to do. Even though we were working with a translator, we'd often kind of complete each other's sentences. And as I said earlier, drawing and visual art became this medium that allowed us to kind of instantly connect despite the distance. And so this was all about empowerment, and Slava likes to say that they were the eyes, and we were kind of, you know, the scissors in a sense, editing the film in Los Angeles, but then sharing dailies and cuts with Slava and Andrei. So we were editing and shooting simultaneously, which is very, very rare. And they became so fluent with the camera, they actually shot over 500 hours of footage on 15 different cameras, and his special forces unit became camera operators. And so it was a very, very tight collaboration despite that distance.
And I'll just quickly add that I think it is probably unique among the 5 co-directing teams here in that you did not even meet your co-director in person until the Sundance premiere of your film?
It was the first time we ever saw each other was when they stepped off the plane in Park City for the premiere. And we hugged for the first time, and we were all just bawling.
That's amazing. Any of the other, no obligation, but any of the other co-directors want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think I'll hop right in.
Please.
So Em and I had the opposite kind of experience. We are essentially like siblings now. We lived together for the better part of 3 years while we shot the film and edited the film. And it was a really incredibly rewarding and challenging creative experience for the both of us. You know, I'd never made a film before. And so Em was really, you know, my guide through, you know, this art form that I would have never practiced if it were not for her. And, you know, as I said before, she's just incredibly, incredibly talented, you know, also a Student Academy Award winner. And, you know, like started making documentaries when she was 14, which is more than half of her life ago now. And I learned so many things from her about visual storytelling, different parts of nonfiction that I get to practice as a writer. And it was just, I'm to this day, like incredibly, incredibly grateful to her for everything that she gave to this film. And she gave so much, you know, in part because for the early part of this film, you know, I really wasn't sure whether I wanted to make it. You know, this is, our film is about, there's 10 up here, so I'll remind you. Our film is about a genocide that people don't know about and people don't recognize. The genocide that happened to the first peoples of this continent. A genocide where they took the children from our families and from our communities and sent them away to schools where they were often abused and worse for speaking their languages, for doing the very things that made us who we are. And part of what happened at these institutions is not just, you know, the abuse that was perpetrated against us, it was also what we carried home back to our own communities and to our own family contexts. And if you see Sugarcane, you will understand that my part of the story, there's multiple characters and my family is one of the narrative threads, is about some of those cycles that then followed us back into our own family contexts. And that was a very complicated story for me to choose to tell, and wasn't one that I could choose to tell. And so for the first year of the film, while I sorted out whether I even wanted to tell this story, Em was all in, you know, making sure that we were shooting with all the right characters, that we were, you know, in the right places at the right time, and also like incredibly open to learning about this world, which was my world, you know, the world that where I have godchildren, where I'm gonna someday be buried, and my perspectives on that. And she incorporated all that into the way that she shot, into the way that we edited the film, and we created what ultimately ended up becoming a truly shared vision for Sugarcane, which, you know, I have a lot of addiction in my family, unfortunately, and so I experienced the creative process as a sort of high. And to share that with Em, who became like a sister to me, and who I experienced some of the most profound and challenging parts of my own life with her holding a camera often while it was unfolding, was just like, you know, I don't use this lightly because I'm a spiritual person, but it was the closest that I have ever felt in my life to creation, whatever that thing is that is greater than ourselves. And so I'm just incredibly grateful to her, and also at the end of the day, incredibly proud of the film that we made. Because, you know, my dad, if you see the film, is an artist. I didn't get to grow up with him. That's also part of what you'll learn if you see the film. And to have that, you know, a visual artistic legacy now in my own way because of the generosity of my co-director is just like the most incredible thing. And it's, you know, I think something that we're going to be, you know, proud to have made together and to share with the world for probably the rest of our lives. And so we're, you know, we're in this together forever, I guess.
Nice. Yeah, please.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, Natalie Ray. Yes. In this collaboration, I will be very transparent, you know, and I'm a Black woman, right? From Richmond, Virginia. That's right, if you're from RVA. And so what I have experienced often is a lot of push out, you know, the sexism and the racism. And so, again, when a white woman came to me to tell my story that I've had to protect for so long, I had to do exactly what I shared with the mothers in the film, if you saw it, and practice what I preach. Get out of your way. And so I had to see this opportunity as being a way to open up hearts and minds from people that I have had personal experiences with that did not see, again, this brilliance of these girls. And so I said this collaboration wouldn't be Angela working with the white woman. It would be Angela collaborating with the right person. And that meant shared vision, shared values, right? You can have the vision, but are your values in line? They have to be aligned. And then we also had this shared voice. This voice that we understood that started with the girls. And so it was a collaboration for me with the art and the activists, because I'm going to say that I am an activist, right? So this activism and this art was just beautifully blended. And again, my first film, debut film, but also I was willing to be coachable and to learn. And when Natalie came into my world, especially with working with a very predominant Black community, the fathers, the coaches, the staff at Girls for Change, she also was willing to learn and unlearn some things, right? But she brought to the film so many amazing resources, the producers, access that I did not have to tell this story outside of a TED Talk, right? And then making sure that her skills, right, were also shared with me to build me up as a new filmmaker. But understanding that I also had something to offer, right? Beyond a story. And I'm sharing this specifically to the students as well, to be open-minded and free-spirited. And I know that as, again, a Black filmmaker, that's our biggest fear, is who's telling our story, and are they going to protect it and nurture it and do it right? And another thing that I loved about our collaboration is that we also really leaned into our families. Please give it up for these young girls and their fathers who were showing their vulnerability. And who took all of us back to that humanity that we all so often lose. Even when you're in the line, just trying to get your food and worried about your self-interest, go back to daughters and understand it is not that serious. But these girls and not being able to have these opportunities to hug their fathers is something that's serious. And we stayed the course in the midst of COVID, you know, in the midst of our jail, you know, resources that we had with our sheriff. being in a position where he lost the election. And that was, a relationship I had, and having to start over. We stayed the course together. Nothing derailed the train to victory on this film with Angela and Natalie because of the shared vision, the shared values, and the shared voice. And that is how we got through this journey. And I just wanted to say that this was one of the most humbling experiences, because I had to let a lot go. But I am grateful for my growth and my development. And I will say, watch out for more, because we have more stories to tell you that have been unheard, unseen, and definitely not celebrated. But we have something together, Natalie, to celebrate, and more to come. Thank you.
If Peter, Stephen, if you would like to.
Can I just add? From the point of view of Ian and I, our first film was just with this. Superman is our third film, so we really are a team now. But the first time we worked together, we were working on a project where there was no access, there was a great deal of hostility towards us, people trying to block us at every step. So our partnership was forged a little bit in the crucible of, it was a tough film to make, the Alexander McQueen film. But I think why the partnership works well is because we both have our own particular tools and sensibilities that we bring to the table. Ian's background is in short form work, making commercials, pop videos, brand films, and his first feature film as a director, narrative feature film. Mine is much more from a screenwriting, dramaturgical background, and producing, and so in a sense, those things kind of mean that the partnership works. It's not that I'm not interested in the visual side of the films, or Ian is not interested in the narrative side, but we trust each other on those things, and we really have great confidence in each other's abilities, I think. That said, I think, what you were just saying about a sense of shared purpose and a sense of shared values. And also, Julian, what you're talking about, that M is now like a sibling to you. I mean, I feel very much the same way about Ian, and we share a similar sense of the kind of films that we want to make, the kind of journeys that we want to take audiences on, and that is absolutely crucial in a partnership if it's to flourish.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, Steve.
I'll keep it
And
short
they make
so we
fun
can
of
get to
each
some
other
other-
the whole time.
What's that?
They make fun of each other the whole time. That's how it goes forward as well.
Ian makes fun of me.
I'll just say quickly, the making of Union honestly was a very challenging process, because we went on this journey with a group of worker-turned-organizers who were going through one of the most tremendously arduous processes. There was no shortage of kind of trauma-informed moments, but also no shortage of people who came to this organization with their own pain and hurt. When you are told you are essential and treated as though you are highly expendable, it is a real recipe for very challenging moments, right? When you then, on top of that, leave your 10, 12-hour shift, go out to a parking lot and set out to organize a $1 trillion company. And so for our team, it was, it was a really hard situation to watch, and also that those hardships kind of would permeate into our lives. There's no way that you can't watch a union go through a very difficult splintering process, right? And let's be honest, organizing is challenging. One of the things that we wanted to look straight on in a sobering way, and that Brett Story and I really agreed on, was that we had to tell an honest story about this organization and movement, and it had to have utility. And so something that I really was grateful. You know, Brett reached out to me. It lives in Toronto. I'm in New York. When she reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to join me and co-direct this film that we're, you know, thinking about making?" I was floored because I loved her work, and I think of her as a tremendously interesting critical thinker. And so the collaboration was interesting because Martin DeCicco, our DP, and I got to be on the ground, you know, during the pandemic and the months after. And we're kind of like living through this really emotionally wrought process of being, you know, in lockstep, you know, embedded. It's a silly word in a way, but sometimes in this situation, it did feel like that. And so there was a great value in being able to, you know, have these conversations, right, of the heart experienced on the ground, and then of the mind, you know, in this kind of collaboration with Brett. And so we worked very nicely in that sense. And one of my favorite things that she said that I have always said to myself in my work is that if this film does not have meaning, if it doesn't honor the participants in the right way and doesn't do the right kind of work, I don't care how many grants or investors or whatever that brought us this moment, we're not going to put it out. And this is one of the first things that Brett also said to me, like, this may not be a film, we'll just put it on YouTube if we need to, as just little clips, but you know, let's make sure we make, you know, the right film. And it was something that I really deeply resonated with.
Well, that kind of brings up a thing I want to raise. There's only, you know, there's a handful of people whose projects this year I think this specifically applies to, but basically, on the one hand, we have documentaries reaching more people than ever before, right? If you happen to end up on a Netflix, for example, your film is in every country in the world, pretty much, except North Korea and Russia. A documentary 30 years ago would be lucky to get a fraction of that exposure. But on the flip side of something like that, I wonder if you, and this is not limited to streamers, but if it's become harder to tackle docs on some hot button subjects, not obviously I'm making a bit of a generalization, but certainly when you touch on politics or war in certain regions of the world or things like that. I mean, I want to raise the fact that Porcelain War, which we've talked about, right? I mean, this is a movie that won big prize at Sundance. We've got Carville and Hollywoodgate and Union. These are great films, and yet I, having spoken to the filmmakers of them, know that it has been a uphill climb to get the distribution that these films deserve. And I wonder if maybe Matt, as somebody who's been around this business for a long time, if you have any thoughts on why that is, if it is in fact getting harder for certain subjects to get out to the world, just what your experience has been. We'll start with you.
Yeah, there seems to be a groupthink in the industry that politics is a third rail and they don't want to deal with it. Not quite sure what to attribute that to. It's probably a few things. It's probably corporate fear of regime change. I'll go back to a film I made in, what was it, 17 or 18. It was about Roy Cohn. And the day Trump won in 16, in my trauma, I wrote a treatment for a film about his mentor, Roy Cohn. And I couldn't get it financed, and then I raised private equity and I made it anyway. And then we did sell it. We sold it to a great distributor, Sony Pictures Classics, and it had a wonderful life. But the fundraising for it was very challenging because we were doing it in the interregnum between Obama and Trump, and we thought, well, we'll get a lot of big liberal money for this, and everyone hid. And it was pretty clear they were afraid that the IRS would audit them, and they didn't want the trouble. And I think we're in a bit of a phase like that right now. So there's that, and it's just easier to not deal with it, I think, quite frankly. For me, that actually makes me want to do it more, frankly. I was told by a lot of people who are kind of institutional people in the film business, oh, please don't do a political film. That made me want to do it more. And we sold it to CNN Films, actually, which I was very pleased about, and we got it out. They turned it around, in like 2 weeks, so it premiered at Telluride and got it out. So I just want to say, don't give up hope. I mean, I think just make the best film you can about the subject you think is the most important thing that you want to do, and it can be done. The groupthink of pessimism and the headwinds is always the hardest part of making any film, much less an independent film. Everyone tells you that your idea is a terrible idea for one reason or another. I'm not sure, they'll find a reason and just ignore it would be my prescription. However, it doesn't mean it's not a real problem. And I think everyone up here who's tried to do it has encountered the same thing. So I'd like to hear their stories as well.
Yeah.
Well, I'll certainly add it's definitely been, it's a very interesting time for independent and just documentary distribution in general. I mean, I think there's a common theme amongst many films here, many stories here, that there is an adversity that you're trying to push through. There's a voice that, that there's a story that needs to be told and people that want to tell it. And I think this is what I've observed. And I'm going to draw a parallel. In times of conflict, you look at, for example, in Porcelain War, in Ukraine, in a war zone, people are creating. They're innovating, they're figuring out ways to do it through community, through collaboration, through their creativity. And if you look at the community of filmmakers, and you look at what's been happening on the festival trail and with the incredible stories here and the films here, audiences are going to see them, communities are showing up to see them, and I think we're going to see coming in the years to come, and even now, there's going to be some incredible innovations in the way that we share stories, and because we're having conversations like this, we are filmmakers, we're storytellers, we're audiences that are all supporting each other. And on our journey, while it's been quite a process to find distribution, we're still searching and working on SVOD and streaming. We've been very fortunate through our journey of film festivals to have theatrical release through Picture House, which we're very, very grateful for, coming out next month on November 22nd with Porcelain War. And that is one of many incredible, I think, examples that audiences are showing people we want to hear the stories that are not being heard, we want to see the stories that are not being seen, and we can do that together.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that I think on top of what you're saying, it's also the films here, like ours that are not getting distribution are ones that touch a live wire that can activate movements of social change, right? There's a great challenge to the status quo that all of our films actually embrace, but in our case, we had distributors, we have a lot of friends on our team that on our team, we have a lot of friends in the industry, and we have been told many times, actually, that we love your film a lot. Just so sorry, we're doing a lot of business with Amazon, or this is a very uncomfortable film for us to embrace. So on top of the fact that people don't want to jeopardize their work with a major conglomerate like Amazon. There's also this idea, I think, that we're in a moment where we are, as filmmakers, facing head-on this idea of alienation in capitalism, right? When capitalism seeks to devalue the work, the product of your labor, is the exact same thing that is happening to the workers in Amazon right now, right? That they are being told that their value is worthless, that they're expendable. The industry and the economics of it and the people who control these gates are trying to say the same thing to us. And I think that what has been very fortunate and exciting for our team is that we see it as an opportunity to reaffirm actually what we see, the value we see in our film. We worked very hard on this because we cared, and I think that that is a thing that we all share. We share a political commitment to the work we do, and so, like you said, we're at the advent of a moment where we are now have an opportunity to redefine the valuable work that we have done, the value of the work we have done, and how we want to distribute it, and not be separated from that product, and actually create more meaningful opportunities for For example, we're doing a worker screening series that we are taking the film out to 20 centrally located facilities that are strategic to Amazon organizing, because we know there's interest there. And so this is a really great opportunity just in general. So I applaud all of us here who are fighting, and I hope all of you will continue to support these films.
Absolutely. And then, so Ibrahim, if you can close us on this subject, and then we will end with a rapid fire round where I'm going to hit everybody one last time with something. So Ibrahim, close on this one, please.
I think our topic is pretty heavy because it touches the American politics and the failure of 20 years of war. It's a very heavy film, and it's a luggage for anybody to carry. We knew that when we were doing it. We've done it in a way that is, we believe it's very artistic, so it could reach all the audience. But you've got to face the fire that the film could cause you if one buyer buys it, and this was at the beginning when we came out. The movie has been going out now for over a year. It premiered at Telluride and Venice last year. We've been going since then. It never stopped. People are watching it, going to so many festivals, and now you've invited us here to be among these incredible filmmakers, which is all a proof that such films will be seen, are unwanted and needed. So all what it takes is someone to actually starts and takes an action and says, okay, I'm gonna do that. And then once someone does it and it works, the others will do it. And that forces me as a filmmaker to continue doing what I'm doing, because I know that I might be the one or that makes someone actually say, okay, let's take this political film, or I might make some other filmmaker that are about to give up doing these kind of films and say, let's make the easy ones. And there's nothing easy in film, but let's make the ones that are having a chance of getting sold rather than these political ones. He sees that I'm trying, then they continue trying, and maybe they are the ones that break this kind of pattern of fear of these documentaries.
Thank you. Well, with the final rapid fire, we're going to come the other direction from which we started.
Oh.
And Morgan, you're going to be in the hot seat first. I just wonder, and essentially for each of you, what you hope, what you feel for yourself, for your subject, for the documentary field, you hope the impact of this film will be. I mean, Morgan, you have really, with this film, taken documentaries into a kind of area that I don't know of any other that's been done like this. Is it something that you would want to do more with, or just, again, what you feel the takeaway will be from this?
Well, I don't know. Animation is such a long, intricate process that it would take me a while to sign up to do it again.
Yeah.
I need those years to set aside to do it. Though I loved it and I love doing it, but to me it's just about what it gets me thinking about more is different ways of storytelling in nonfiction. Which I've seen so much of that happen, and those part of what people now talk about and part of the acceptance of documentary to a broader audience is because of this new type of storytelling and the idea that we can reach the kind of audiences that weren't available to me when I started. We were always kind of had PBS and maybe a little bit at HBO, and that was the only way to get your film seen ever. So I'm excited about that. And hearing what everybody is saying about distribution, I couldn't agree more. We're going through a transformation. I think we're at an ebb moment right now, but I think the tide is turning. I do see a lot of green shoots of everything coming back, and so I'm excited. If you're going into filmmaking, don't be discouraged. Please keep doing it, and I'm excited to see what y'all do.
Thanks. Shiori, it's hard enough to just, go through privately what you went through, but you've shared and, what you went through with so many other people. Has that been, cathartic for you? Is it helpful to see the impact that your film is having on others?
Well, these 8 years filmmaking was hell painful. It was like constant of expose and therapy session, which I wish I forget. And so many footage that I watched and editing I've been forgotten what happened to me. so many moments. But now, after completing it, after premiering at Sundance, I felt like it traveled off my shoulder. And now I can say that if you have a trauma, make a film. It really helped me in the end. It was really hard, but it really helped me. And also, it's important for you to know, especially for survivors or anyone who has trauma, but you can do this. You have your own voice to tell your own story. Because often, especially sexual violence story, I felt like it's been told by third person. And whenever I talk to other journalists, my words were always edited, and I didn't feel okay about it. And so now I'm very happy. It was very empowering to know that I've done this, I could do this, and now I can encourage others to do it the same.
Thank you. Yeah. Josh, we're talking about the reach of Netflix a moment ago, and I mean, already in the short time that your film has been out to the world, I imagine you're seeing some of that already. What's that been like for you to just get a sense through social media or whatever, how impactful it can be?
You're making me think of something. It's amazing. I have a text chain with Will and Harper, and it's active while it was buzzing in my pants. I'm like, I bet it's Will and Harper. But just this morning, Harper texted, I'm trying to find it, but she said, oh, it's working. I just got a dessert and a drink bought for me. That's not obviously why we set out to make the film, but that's Harper's measure right now of how the film's going. If people are spotting her and saying, hey, good for you. No, it's been incredible. There's a Roger Ebert quote that I love that I think he was probably talking about narrative films, but I think it applies for sure, if not more for all of us in the doc community, which is that a great film is like a machine that generates empathy. And I think that, and how it does that can be all sorts of different styles and tones, and I think that's really true. And so it's been a joy for me to see the reach and the impact that our film has, but all of these films, and I've gotten fortunate to see most of them in theaters, which I still love, and so please see them in theaters when they're out there. But however you can see them, see them. They've moved me beyond words, and I was fortunate enough to be with Shiori at her premiere at Sundance, and we danced up on stage at the end of her premiere, which was amazing. But yeah, it's been, and last thing I would say for those who are trying to make films is I think sometimes, like I work in sort of the comedy space a lot, even in my documentary space, it's often in the comedy world, and let's not ever discount or discredit laughter and joy, because that can really move people. There's an expression I love that is laughter is the shortest distance between two people, and I believe in that. I know Will and Harper believe in that, and so sometimes it doesn't seem as heavy or important, but I think we need as much joy and laughter as we do all the other emotions that move us. So, yeah, don't discount that. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Peter, your film is still making its way out to the release, but I know the Reeves kids have seen it and shared their thoughts. I guess as a early barometer of how you've done, that must be nice to hear from them, what they've said.
It's lovely to hear it was a great moment when they saw the film for the first time and they responded so well to it. But I think that the three of them and the two of us as filmmakers, I think the thing that is so moving for us is having a film that is released theatrically on a fairly large scale by Warner's across the world, and having audience reactions, because I think the empathy machine thing absolutely is why we do it. When you go into when you see a film, you're seeing the world from a different point of view than your own, and you learn to sort of embrace that, and you feel the world in a different way somehow. And I think that the wonderful thing about cinema, about the theatrical experience, is that we're together doing it. It's a communal thing, and I honestly think it does sort of change you, change your perspective and change your approach to the world when it works properly. And I think we've experienced that from the reactions of people all over who've responded in a very personal way to a story that, you know, is very remote, potentially very remote from them. And that's the beauty of movies.
Thank you. Absolutely. Ibrahim, this journey for you must have all been a bit surreal. One minute you're in Afghanistan with the Taliban wanting to see your footage, then you leave, and I'm sure just by having been there, it's not made your various airport visits particularly pleasant. I mean, this is you've found yourself in the middle of a really hot button topic, but you've shed light on it that I didn't think it was possible that somebody would be able to, you know, give us this kind of a window onto what's happened there. What for you has been the most meaningful feedback? You've been on for more than a year, been on the circuit of getting this out there, so you've had a lot of people that have, I'm sure, shared feedback.
Yeah, since we've had the movie shared with people, and we were always going out saying that we were hoping that the people would understand that the forever war mentality was a failure, and that you should never go out to fight an idea with a weapon, because you could never fight an ideology with a weapon, and that once you do that, you understand that you're starting this idea of starting a war that begets war, and we wanted to warn the people that the Taliban understand propaganda. And that's a weapon in their hand. They did not only inherit from the US the weapons that were left behind, and they were able to fix it, but they also inherited the propaganda tools that are now applying on the Afghan women and on the Afghans in every day, that today they are banning pictures, like moving pictures on the TV, banning women from going to the public park, regardless of the fact that they ban women from schools. They are applying an apartheid on women. So I think the situation in Afghanistan is just going lower and lower and lower. But I'm gonna tell you the most, I don't know if it's the best or the craziest for me, but it came from decision makers that they said this movie, when we saw it, and I don't want to say who exactly, but someone very high in power said, this movie has given us the piece of the missing piece of puzzle to understand the Taliban. And in my head, I'm like, should I be happy that I have done this, or should I be sad because what were you doing there for 20 years? If you watch 1 hour and a half and understand them, what were you doing there for 20 years? So if we don't really work on trying to understand the other and not just judge what's happening on the other side, and actually have the good intentions of trying to make a better place, we will all be in a better place with no wars.
Thank you. Angela, your film has certainly boosted sales of Kleenex. This is a very emotional experience to watch this. I wonder, though, from hearing from the children and families who are depicted in it, you know, having been with them for the years of making it, but also now that other people are getting to see what they've gone through, have they told you about how it's affected them?
Absolutely, and Kleenex needs to be a sponsor,
That's right.
girlsforchange.org. Okay, so absolutely. Yes, you know, that was unexpected for me. I knew that Natalie and I were telling a story that was definitely untold and would definitely pull on the heartstring, but what made me understand that we did something that was game-changing is when the girls actually shared with us that it was therapeutic for them as well, right? And understanding that they wanted to support it and become ambassadors and really partner with us on our social impact campaign. And when you have young people who say they want to join a movement, then you have definitely moved some things. And I believe that we were able to achieve that goal because the girls understood to trust the process with Natalie and I. And this coming of age story actually helped everyone just buy into this movement. But I would also say what it has done for me personally as well as a filmmaker is understood that it was something that was missing when you have Black women specifically, and many people have been impacted by these harmful practices in the criminal justice system. But I am a Black woman first, and I know that, and I know what that feels like. And when I am in film festivals and they line up and they say, thank you for telling my Aubrey story, thank you for telling my Jayana story, my Santana story, and my Rizaya story, I just say we have now grabbed the attention of so many that needed this story so that they can get through the healing process, which is the hard work. And so many viewers have said, now I'm picking up the phone and I'm ready to do the work with my father, or their fathers who are ready to apologize, or their entire families that are ready for their healing circles. And that is what I signed up for too, at first. Grateful for all these opportunities, but the work for me was healing, because I understood that my community was in chaos. I understood that so many people did not understand what was happening around disrupting families, and people had the wrong idea because they did not have access to the correct information. And so again, I was invited to a medium that would bring attention to something that would make everyone understand that there is a call to action. And this film has allowed you to know that there is something that you can do. And every last one of us have one thing in common that we can do that shows our power of change when you watch films, and that is to go vote. And lastly, what I will share is Sister Santana came to me at one of our film festivals, and you know what she shared with me? I am now going to be a civil rights attorney because I understand that there's still more change that needs to be done, and you have given me an opportunity to understand that my voice matters. And that is what Natalie and I signed up for. And so if you want to know more about the children and what they're doing, follow our impact campaign, because I told you before, more to come, more to do. And this is now Natalie and I, new mountain to climb to make sure that this film is used as a political film. We're going to put it in more jails and prisons and schools and everywhere else that we feel like people can now take a stand for something that truly matters, and that is love. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Stephen, you guys spent years on this not knowing what the result was going to be for this effort. There are, I'm sure, many other Amazon employees and people at other places that have not necessarily been great employers who I'm sure are finding this pretty inspiring. I don't want to spoil exactly what happens in your film for people who haven't seen it yet, but it does leave us with some hope.
Yeah, you know, the late, great documentary editor of films like Paris is Burning and other great films, Jonathan Oppenheim, once told me many years ago as a bit of advice in a hard moment that it is a time-honored tradition in nonfiction filmmaking to, at one point in the process, have no idea what the fuck is happening and what to do about it. And I've never been told truer words, right? That actually our work and what I really took away from the workers, the worker organizers of the ALU is that when we embrace the uncertainty of the process, like you're talking about, that is when we find our power, right? It's, you know, it's like the Black radical feminist bell hooks used to talk about that we have to be unashamed of our discomfort, and in fact lean into that. That's where you find your power. That's where change happens, and that was so true in watching the Amazon Labor Union in their fight, and I think, you know, for like the filmmakers out here, I don't want us to scare you off from this work, because it is the greatest privilege to get to do this work, because there is no other practice that allows you to explore your discomfort, to explore the things that scare you the most in this society, in this world, and lean into that and find that there is a path and a process and that there's power in that. And so I think that applies to organizing, it applies to documentary filmmaking. And I'll just say, like, one other thing that sort of touches on what you were saying, Natalie, is that something that was very instructive to me is that, to understand that the working class movement is not monolithic. It is actually defined today by many kinds of social positions, ideologies, beliefs, and that, in fact, it is a movement that embraces all of us, that we are all part of that class struggle. Because if we choose not to see it as such, then we all lose. Our friends, our families, our neighbors all lose. And if we actually lean into this as a shared collective struggle, we can unlock not just poor working conditions, lack of health care, lack of housing security, all the things that people worry about, but we can unlock just all of the issues of society at large, that the working class possess that power and that we need to organize and support and pay attention to the grassroots movements that today are worker-led, minority-led, immigrant-led, female-led, and that has never been the case before. So I just leave you with that. If you look into the original National Labor Relations Act of 1935 that gave us the right to collectively bargain against our employers, it excluded domestic workers and agriculture workers. By law, they were not allowed to participate in that. Who were those people? They were black and brown minorities, they were women. And so we're at this moment for the first time where these are the communities that are taking the reins, and I think we need to pay attention to that and lean into that as well with our support.
Thank you. Brendan, we know that, thank God Slava is here with us today, and maybe you can, just fill us in on what's been happening since your film blocked.
So we've been very, very lucky for Slava and Anya to be able to be here in the United States for some time, sharing their story. And Slava talks about this. He says, I had the choice to pick up a weapon or pick up a camera. I can make such a greater impact by picking up a camera and telling my story. And since the film has been completed, we are very, very lucky to say that Andrei, who's in the film, has been safe, although he has been, so far, he's been in Kharkiv. He's still continuing to train civilians and train soldiers. His family is safe. And the members of Saigon, the members of Slava's Special Forces unit, since the film has been completed, they've been seeking out the most difficult, the most intense missions possible. And they're doing this as civilians, as peace-loving people that don't want to fight a minute longer than they have to, because they realize this is the only way to save their families, their homeland, their culture. And we had a very, very unusual screening of the film. We shared the completed film with them, and they watched it, and they said, every time we do a mission, we come back, and they're very, very fortunate to have decompression, different psychological and emotional help for a few days afterwards. And they said watching this film was more powerful than anything that we've had. Being able to see that our story, that us risking our lives to record what we're going through and risking our lives to defend our loved ones, that had some meaning, that was there. If they were able to do that, that maybe someone else wouldn't need to be in their shoes. And it's been very surprising and incredible to us that as we showed the story throughout film festivals here in the US and abroad, people have said, this story might take place in Ukraine, but it's about all of us. It's about the world, because we all need to embrace the power of storytelling and its ability to connect us, its ability to allow us to understand each other. And that's been really, really, experience we're so grateful for.
Thank you. Absolutely. Matt, you must still be trying to get your bearings, because you had not one but two documentaries that just premiered at the Telluride Film Festival. The other one, also terrific, about Nobu, the great sushi chef. But this, you just, as we said, this is so recently completed. The events that it's dealing with are very much still at the forefront. Carville's reaction. I'd love to. I mean, he's here, so that's a good sign. But also, what are you guys thinking ahead of Tuesday as well? I'd be curious.
Well, James didn't see the film until it premiered, which is, I'm sure everyone up here, that's all of our dream, that the subject doesn't ask to see it till it premieres. And it was wonderful. We watched in the Opera House at Telluride. I was kind of like 2 seats over from him. He was convulsively sobbing during the film, but in the best way possible. And he likes it. I'm sure everyone up here would also say, I don't make my films so that my subject should like them. That's not the goal. I've had it happen both ways. I've gone to war with people I've made films about, and litigation has been threatened, and there's always been a happy ending and a red carpet and a standing ovation for them, and then they turn and change their minds. They like the red carpet and the standing ovation, so that's a happy ending generally. But James accepted it. We've been on the road with it. I think something interesting that has happened is because the film came out and showed that he was prescient, and he already has a platform on cable news, this has sort of quintupled his visibility during the final weeks of the campaign. So I'm glad for that, because he, I think, is the most coherent spokesperson for democracy, actually. He's a master at giving a message, and he's been out there really stumping. And I don't really predict, and he doesn't predict either. He is in town, and he will be at the screening tomorrow, and if you come, he will answer your questions about what his crystal ball says. And all I can say is he thinks it's very close, and that we all have to get out and, as has been said before on this panel, vote.
Yes, thank you. Finally, Julian, we've heard people talk about filmmaking being a cathartic thing for them. I wonder if that's been your experience, but also if you want to comment on something that happened in the last week, which is, even though the particular school that you're focused on is within Canadian borders now, there are many similar situations that have happened within United States borders, and President Biden issued a formal apology on behalf of the U.S. federal government for things that happened over these past, decades and centuries of things like that. And so again, just the personal effect that this had on you, but also to be able to see that I don't think that's a coincidence that this is being talked about now by the President of the United States.
Well, Cooks Scott, thank you for giving me both the first and the last word. No pressure, I guess. Whew. So 4 years ago, before I had the incredible privilege to turn full-time to filmmaking and writing, I actually used to work in politics, and because we didn't invent those borders as First Peoples. Those borders were put over us. I actually grew up in the U.S. Because that's part of our treaty rights as First Nations peoples. We're allowed to live and work in the States. My dad's lived and worked here for the majority of my life. My mom's American. So I grew up in the U.S. away from my community. And when I was in politics, I was, I guess, influential enough to get one Zoom call ever with James Carville. So, not very influential. But one thing that I did ever do that actually was ever of consequence was in the summer of 2020, before Joe Biden got elected, I threw out this idea into the think tank world, the social media world, and to my journalism, that Deb Haaland, who was at the time a first-term congresswoman from New Mexico, should be appointed by a would-be Biden presidency as the first ever Native American cabinet secretary, that she should be the Secretary of the Interior. We'd never, to that point in our history, ever had an Indigenous Interior Secretary. We'd never even had a Native person in the cabinet of the United States. Just think about that for like half a second. That's wild. And I didn't think anything would come of this, because I had only ever gotten on a Zoom call with James Carville one time in my entire life. And then something did. Then the administration did the right thing. And of course, a couple months after Deb was, Auntie Deb as I call her, she's become a close friend, was confirmed by the Senate, that's when I got the call from M and set out on this journey to tell this story about my own family and my own community's history at the Indian residential schools. And of course, Deb, after the discovery, set out on a federal inquiry into the schools here, the Native American boarding schools, which have gotten, there were 417 of them in this country, 139 in Canada. The schools here were invented first. The ideology of, quote, kill the Indian, save the man comes from this country. You guys invented this and exported it to Canada and to the rest of the world. And yet there has not been any parallel reckoning in this country. The Secretary of the Interior came to our world premiere in her personal capacity in Sundance, which was just an incredible honor. And then, of course, on Friday, Em and I were sitting in the second row, because we got kicked out of the first row, for the President's formal apology to boarding school survivors, where Deb Haaland spoke right before the President about the inquiry, and as the survivor of boarding school attendees, and the President apologized in this really heartfelt, forceful even way. And I think for our stories finally to be seen and acknowledged in this way, it means the world to me. It meant the world to our impact producer Jade Begay, whose family had also attended the schools, who's sitting right next to me as it happened. I know that it has meant a lot to the survivors of these institutions, but I think also just the way in which some of these things have come together. As Native people, we can often feel that, look what they took from us. It's like God was against us, And God was against us. That's what they did with those schools. They took our kids away to schools where they indoctrinated them not only in a religion, but an entire way of life that was not our own, and that was the point. And then for us to have been delivered through this, for this film to have come together the way it did, for Deb to have somehow, against the odds, become the Interior Secretary, and for the President to finally apologize, it makes me, and I think other people who were touched by this film, who've come to our screenings, feel like maybe there is something greater that is actually on our side this time. Maybe, we survived this long, long night, and that something will actually come of that meaning might be made of it. And I'm just incredibly honored to have been, part of that. I'm again grateful that Em pulled me into it. And also just incredibly proud to say that next month, our film is gonna screen in both Parliament in Canada for the Prime Minister and also in the White House in the United States in back-to-back days. Which is crazy, So, yeah,
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you who came and stayed with us for, it's a long but a good one, I think. And I want to thank all of you guys for coming to Savannah and doing this. And I will just leave you with the encouragement to seek out these films and tell other people about them. They're all worth your time, very worth your time. If you can do it on the big screen, do it, but see them one way or another. And thank you all again very much. Appreciate it.